Some really interesting things happen at the intersection between the reptilian brain and the empathic or human brain. The more traumatized an individual is, correlates to the more traumatic the culture or environment in which the individual is immersed is. Traumatic environments lead to trauma. Trauma stimulates and activates the reptilian brain with its protocol of fight, that which is smaller, flight, run from that which is bigger, and freeze when neither of those options are available. And at a human level, unlike reptiles, there's also a please protocol, which is to cozy up with someone that is perceived to be powerful or high rank within the cult, and then try to ingratiate yourself. So it's a form of prostitution. I will take care of you if you will protect me. And all of the reptilian programs are fear-based. There's no room for love in the reptilian brain because it's all about survival in a sociopathic or reptilian environment. So down here we have the reptilian brain. And in the middle, we have the rational brain. And the rational brain is neutral. It is all about pattern recognition and analysis. And the most dangerous creature on Earth is the rational sociopath. Sometimes that rationality can be taken to a genius level because it's cold. All of the bandwidth is going to pattern analysis. There's no confusion of empathy. It's the isolated individual in a contest or battle with the rest of the world or environment. And the combination of imagination, of memory, of kind of strategy and analysis brings the rational sociopath to an incredibly high level of functionality based on fear, and the power is manipulation. So the rational sociopath is fear-based, and their leverage in the cult is instilling and manipulating through fear. So in a dictatorship, whether that's a pimp and a prostitute, whether that's a domestic violence situation where one side has the power, the purse strings around security, whether that's a dominant military, whether that's a big person bullying a small person. You have the law of mass is the primary law in the reptilian environment. Bigger in whatever that bigness is measured by. If it's a gun, it's a bigger, faster gun. If it's a body, it's a bigger, faster body. If it's a political system, it's a bigger, more potent political system. And it's power through oppression. Now, at a sexual level, the sexuality is one of dominance and submission, of sadism and masochism, of stimulation. Basically, it's not about love, it's about power and sensation. There is no love in the reptilian brain. And so one of the ways that we can gauge how deeply we are enmeshed in our reptilian brain, which is another way of gauging how deep the unresolved trauma is in our life, which is another way of measuring how traumatic or sociopathic our cult is by the degree of arousal that comes from fight, flight, freeze versus empathy. If when you really care about someone and feel a deep love, or when you have a sense of honor or respect or sacredness, as in the Transcendent brain, then the sexuality flows primarily from empathy, primarily from care. When the dominant blood supply is going to the reptilian brain, then one's arousal will come from the ability to dominate, to express power over, or being in a position where one is dominated. And so in a male-female dynamic, the masculine, well, there's a distinction between masculine and feminine, male and female, but traditionally, because in a reptilian environment, the male is dominant simply because of their larger mass. In patriarchal cultures, the male is dominant because they control the purse strings, the weaponry, and also have a larger body that is more organized to hunting, and more adrenaline and assertiveness through the initiatory aspect of masculinity. And so if as a female, or in today's environment, in a feminine role, connecting with receptive feeling, you are aroused by dominance. Now, what does this mean? It means you're aroused by power, assertiveness, confidence, the ruthlessness, the ability to cause harm and win, to come out on top. If you're aroused by and want to have sex with the head of a football, the quarterback in a football team, if that's arousing to you, if you find the James Bond character sexy because of the combination of strength, intelligence, winning, and devoid of feelings. You'd be in the region of the empathic brain if there were feelings and empathy. If you're drawn to stoicism, the strong, silent winner who doesn't have feelings, you're talking about a reptile in a human body. If that's arousing, then what it's saying is that our reptilian brain is getting a lot of the blood supply because there is unresolved trauma, which means there's a loop. Often in states of helplessness in childhood, there's a loop that's going round and round that's about powerlessness. And the flow, because sexual energy is about flow, chemistry is about the way in which energy flows. And peak arousal is peak flow. But energy flow, whether it's electricity or sexual or mental, is neutral. The pattern organizing element of the rational brain is completely neutral. And in its neutrality, the rational brain, the pattern organizing brain, which is used to predict the future by recognizing a pattern, understanding the pattern, and then using that understanding to predict the future. That's what the reptilian brain does. And that's pretty much all it does, is it predicts the future based on pattern analysis. So a reptile uses this to gain more power at the expense of others to secure dominance through fear. A reptile will notice psychological elements and say, aha, this person is ashamed of their sexuality, for example. And so if a reptile can gain video or photo evidence of a person in an act for which they feel shamed or for which the cult will shame them, then the reptile is gaining power. This was one of Jeffrey Epstein's focuses, was to associate with powerful men and then induce shame-based sexual activity, meaning in our cult, older men having sex with underage women, having promiscuous sex, having secret affairs is shameful, meaning the cult will shame men for engaging in that behavior. And everyone wants to avoid shame and being shamed, because in the extreme, being disowned from the cult, being disowned from the circle, means death. To be put outside the circle in a mammalian species is to die, is to be on the outside of support, of reward, of empathy. And so the cult and every cult decides what is and is not shameful. For example, chimpanzees, they do not have age restrictions on sex. So a chimp will not, a herd of chimpanzees, or whatever the terminology is, a pack or a herd, will not shame a male for having sex with a 9-year-old chimpanzee. If the chimpanzee is too young, they're not going to have children, but there's not a shame around that particular thing. There's not an attack for that. But not letting the alpha get their prime cut in a hunting party, then there might be a bullying dynamic, because chimps are largely reptilian. There's elements of empathy and feelings and support coming in, but it's a dominance hierarchy. Now, the same is true in reverse, that if one's arousal as an initiator of sex in the masculine role, the assertive top role in dominant submission, the dominance role, is the primary arena of sexual arousal, meaning that, in order to get a peak erection and peak pleasure, one engages in a fantasy or a physical act of dominance, and that's what increases the arousal. If in pornography, it is watching traditionally a woman be subjugated or ganged up on, etc. And so that's where the arousal is. What it's saying is that the blood supply at a very deep level is going strongly to the reptilian brain, which is saying that there is unresolved trauma, because a human being will naturally blossom into the transcendent brain if they are in a transcendent culture. Now, what is a transcendent culture? First of all, it's a culture of abundance, where there's a shared commitment to every member of the culture meeting their full expression of their human needs, survival. See, we're surrounded by people who are not surviving, and the cult is not committed to the survival of every one of its members. It's actually in business, which is a sociopathic form of warfare, it's believed that the good of the cult is achieved by multiple people staking their hopes, dreams, fortunes, and hours and bodies on being able to come out on top, to compete and get business, and that the real winner is the one that consumes the other businesses and drives them under. Microsoft was referred to as the 800-pound gorilla in the software industry because they would intimidate with fleets of lawyers that could bankrupt smaller companies. They could bully. They could threaten directly that we will attack you if you don't do this. We will withhold what you need to survive unless you do what we want. The U.S. government, behind closed doors, or militarily, the exact same protocol. We're bigger than you. We have the bigger military. We have the bigger economy. So if you do not do what we demand, a reptilian protocol, we will use our superior mass to consume you. So when you're in a reptilian cult, you will experience repeated traumas directly or indirectly through mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are the empathic brain's feelers out to empathize with and understand the people in our environment. And when we use our mirror neurons to connect with someone, to empathize with them, and we witness superior force being leveraged against an innocent party for the purpose of exploiting the resources. For example, a Thai girlfriend of mine was told by a powerful Thai family that she had to give up her government position and her promotion to one of their family members. And if she did that, they would not kill her father. If she did not give up the position, they would send a hit squad on her father, like they had done to other people without the power in the political system. And her father would be dead. And in Thai culture, the child is shamed for not taking care of the parent. So not only would she lose her father, but she would be induced into shame as if she, not the murderer, had caused the death of her father. So she gave up the pay raise and promotion to an unworthy, incompetent member of a political family to protect the life of her father. Now, if you care about her at all, you will experience the pain of trauma because your pattern organizing brain at some level understands that this is not personal. It's not personal that a million Iraqi civilians were murdered, were induced into PTSD by superior military force for a lie. There were no weapons of mass destruction other than the U.S. military. As soon as the U.S. military arrived looking for weapons of mass destruction, quote unquote, it was a weapon of mass destruction that systematically murdered 1 million Iraqi civilians. And that sends a very clear message around the globe that the American people will stand by, will believe the lies of power-hungry politicians to seek revenge because they can, because they have a bigger military. Ding, 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 ding. Your reptilian brain gets more blood because the reptilian brain is necessary for you to survive a sociopathic environment in which that happens all the time. Meaning, whether it's my Thai girlfriend losing a job that she'd worked hard to earn to support her family for fear of her father being shot and her being shamed, or whether that's an innocent Iraqi grieving the death of his grandmother who was blown up in a smart bomb because the U.S. military can, or whether that's the ring of parents and friends shaming the child for talking about incest and sexual abuse in the family because the male controlled the purse strings, or because the reputation of the family was deemed as more important than the felt well-being of that child. We witness the wholesale slaughter of innocence, the wholesale slaughter of the empathic brain, which overloads with pain. It gets too loud, and there's no way to respond to that level of pain in a reptilian environment, and so it shuts down more to minimize the pain that is helplessly felt by the empath, by the victim. Anyone who empathizes with that person is in pain unless they shut their empathic brain down and enter the reptilian brain, which feels no pain, it feels fear. But there's no empathy, and the grief is not as great. There's a rational understanding. That party was bigger than this party, and so might makes right is one of the slogans of the reptilian brain. So if in the masculine role, your sexual energy primarily flows in dominance, in aggression, that's what brings about arousal and orgasm, then what you're communicating to yourself is that you are in a traumatic, sociopathic environment that has fed and triggered stimulation of blood of your reptilian brain, and that this is where your energy primarily resides. Because when you graduate from the reptilian protocol into love, into empathy, then the primary flow of sexual energy is the joy, the pleasure of the other. To make someone happy, to bring them joy, to help them feel safe, brings about arousal, brings about flow, brings about a feeling of joy and of love. Now, there's a constant migration between the empathic brain, which is above the rational brain in terms of the evolutionary hierarchy, and the reptilian brain. The more scary the environment, the more sociopathic the environment. For example, I was out on a lovely walk at midnight in my neighborhood just before this video, and it's raining, it's warm, it's so beautiful. But there's a car in a no parking zone that's at the end of a street where cars don't normally park. And I'm aware that this is an unknown. And I'm aware that my cult has sociopathic elements. And as long as even 5% of the cult is sociopathic, when you're dealing with the unknown, the brain defaults to the negative. Why? Well, let's say that 5% of the time that I encounter an unknown like that, there would be some danger of my life. And 95% there wouldn't. What that means is that if I go on a walk in my neighborhood and I get to the end of a dark street and there's a car in a no parking zone in a dark area, and I have to walk within 3 feet of that car, it means that 1 to 5 out of 100 times that something might go wrong. I might be robbed, I might be molested, I might be intimidated in some kind, I might be run over if someone's high on some delusional drug and is paranoid. They might see me as the threat walking towards their car. And so in order for my life to continue, I have to understand, 1, that I'm not psychic, and 2, that I need to reroute to avoid the unknown. Because if I take 100 walks and I take 100 bets of trusting the unknown in a cult that has a sociopathic element, one of those times I'm going to be wrong. And in that one time, my life could end. And in order to prioritize the need for survival, the brain amplifies that this could be the night. And so I reroute. And as I reroute, I'm aware, because I know that car and its occupants are aware that I'm on the street. And so as I reroute and take another route up the mountain, in the corner of my eye, I watch the car doing some weird figure eights, coming back, someone getting out of the car, turning off the lights, turning on the lights, driving around and parking closer to where I'm going to be exiting my path. And so I'm aware. 95% of the time, I'll be perfectly fine, particularly as a tall male, because of the dominance factor, because for the most part, perpetrators look for victims that are perceived as smaller than them. And so I haven't really ever been bothered, as a tall male walking with relative confidence. But I'm aware. And as I become aware, I descend into, blood flows into my reptilian brain. I'm going down. I'm imagining the worst case scenarios, and I'm also sorting out how to solve them. What if this happens? What if that happens? And that's just blood going to that region of the brain. And that region of the brain, that's its job, is to survive a sociopathic or potentially sociopathic environment. And so my rational brain is doing the pattern analyzing, the code work, for the fear symbols that are coming up from meeting the unknown in a cult that has a distinctive reptilian element. Now, as I move into the house, into safety, the blood flows up. There's no longer an unfamiliar event to trigger that alarm. And so now as I'm thinking of different videos, etc., it's largely out of empathy, meaning this video is for you. I already sorted these thoughts out. I'm sharing them for you. And so there's a flood of blood towards empathy towards the fact that these are complex things that I've never heard sorted out and presented in just this way. And it's useful to understand them. It's useful to understand what's going on. We might even feel a little bit safer, a little bit more sane, a little bit more empathy for ourselves when we understand what's going on. And that's running in the background. Because I could say that if you are reptilian, or if you notice that your sexuality is primarily driven by dominance and submission, it's because you're unspiritual, or you're a bad person, or you're not moral, or you're not whatever, that this is a fault with you. But the purpose of contextualizing it, of understanding that reptilian environments stimulate reptilian brains, and that the reptilian brain is latent in every human being. It's the brain stem. So it can always be triggered. The only way to transcend the reptilian brain is through extensive training in things such as Buddhist and Zen meditation, things of that nature, or to create and co-create, because one cannot do it alone, to co-create a more and more empathic environment. And with a more and more empathic environment, then empathy is the natural fruit. Empathy is what gets the blood. And you can tell the difference between an empathic environment and a reptilian or sociopathic environment, because in a sociopathic environment, people who are minorities of all kinds are exploited, or their suffering is ignored and their needs are ignored by the majority. That's what happens in a reptilian environment. Why? Because minorities are not threats to the majority. In a sociopathic environment, the majority is a threat to the minority, right? If Christianity in a sociopathic cult was still the dominant power, then people would still be burnt at the stake. So why has Christianity backed off? Why are witches no longer being burned at the stake? Why are heretics no longer being tortured in the Spanish Inquisition? Why are native tribes people, for the most part, not having their soles of their feet macheted off and being raped and treated like animals in order to extract gold, as happened on the journey over to the Americas? Why is that no longer happening? Well, the church is losing rank. As science ascends, the church has descended, and so it can no longer cut people's heads off for not believing in God, or excommunicate them and banish them effectively in a traumatic move to threaten people not to question the book. Now, in fundamentalist Islam, that is still the case. So the most ruthless expressions of religion today are in those domains where the religious leaders have extreme power. Now, the same is true in totalitarian dictatorships. Why is Saddam, or was Saddam Hussein, or Pol Pot, or Hitler, or Stalin, why are and were some world leaders so extreme in their brutality? It's because of the extremity of power, meaning when you're primarily in the reptilian brain, the more power you have, the more that power is expressed by instilling fear in others in order to maintain the power out of a fear of loss of power. Power over is the dominant language of the reptilian brain. That's its job, is to secure power, to defend against a sociopathic world that is there or projected, and to perpetuate being in the dominant role. And so all kinds of underhanded opportunities are sought to do that, whether it's the Vietnam War being based on a lie in the Gulf of Tonkin, or the war on drugs being based on a lie initiated by Nixon to oppress liberals, blacks, and women, or whether it's the war on terror being used to justify a war of terror that sanctions drone bombings of weddings to potentially take out a terrorist. What is more terroristic than to bomb a people's wedding and instill terror on an entire nation? The people that get to call terrifying a nation a war on terror are the people with the biggest bombs. In other words, the U.S. military. There are plenty of people and countries that are afraid and terrified of the U.S. military, in many cases that have better ethical standards. But because the U.S. military is the top dog, the peak of the dominance hierarchy, then it gets to claim that it is pursuing a war on a feeling, a war on terror, a war on drugs. Both of these are nonsensical. Drugs are not the enemy. And if your people were not in so much pain due to the sociopathic behavior of your cult, people would not seek to become dissociatively high. They would enjoy their lives. And so, it's important to understand that to the degree that you are reptilian is to the degree that your brain has been stimulated by a reptilian cult. Now, in the mix of this, we have freedom, but the freedom is not to stop reptilian signals in a sociopathic environment. It is the job of your reptilian brain to run from sociopaths in a sociopathic environment so that you can survive. There's nothing wrong with you or your reptilian brain for doing that. There is something irrational about a cult that traumatizes you in infancy, in childhood, in adulthood, that shames and traumatizes you, but then follows up by shaming you for having reptilian reactions to the shame and trauma induced and caused by the very cult that is shaming you for reacting to shame and trauma. That is irrational. It is sociopathic. It makes no sense. It's profoundly cruel. And so it's important to understand that to the degree that you or anyone else is behaving sociopathically is to the degree that that brain, that body has been barraged with sociopathic messages, sometimes through mirror neurons, which is the empathic brain, watching someone else be harmed. That's why a scapegoat is common in an incompetent and sociopathic culture. And sexuality doesn't lie. So we can notice, I want to see someone being hurt, and then I feel aroused. Okay, so we're in sociopathic reptilian territory. which means there's unresolved traumas that are captivating the energy, that are reminding us that we're unsafe, which means that we're surrounded by and we are in a sociopathic environment. The way out of that is not to moralize the reptilian brain, it's just doing its job, but rather to understand the dynamic and co-create a safer, a more empathic culture. Now, ironically, to a reptile, to the reptilian brain, in a power position, empathy, love, represents liberation from fear of the dictator, of the reptile, of the dominator. And so there's often an attack on empathic groups, whether it's the Chinese attacking Tibet and destroying their monasteries, their cult, their culture of meditation, etc., in order to instill fear, because fear is a very efficient virus to spread because it's the oldest area of the brain. The fear brain is the most developed. And so if you give 1 unit of pleasure and 1 unit of pain, because the reptilian brain is the largest and the oldest in terms of its responsiveness to stimuli, and because survival is predicated by avoiding all death-potentiated trauma, then that brain becomes center stage. And as soon as the reptilian brain is center stage, by terrifying and traumatizing it, now terror and trauma spread like a virus. Because once a person who might have been enjoying themselves happily is now induced into their reptilian brain, now they can behave as a reptile, as a sociopath, which then can spread fear into others. So fear spreads much more rapidly than joy. If you smile, smiling doesn't ripple through the group as rapidly as a shout of fire. And so you don't have a stampede because somebody smiles. You have a stampede if someone yells fire in a building. And so we're always moving up and down in our reptilian brain. And one of the challenges is when we have our ideals, our mind of what a good person is, that are empathic, but our primary physiology is reptilian, because our primary physiology is carrying the scars of multiple undiagnosed and untreated trauma in a sociopathic culture that asks for the trauma to be buried in the body rather than liberated, integrated, and healed. Hi, I'm Dan Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.